how do we set the conditions so that the gut can heal itself? Well, it turns out the most powerful vector of change, even within 72 hours, according to the literature, is diet, right? That's not so shocking because what greater connection to our environment do we have to read our environment? It's nutrition, it's the food that we take in, and it's the information that it transmits.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hoda Labrada Gore. This is episode 123, and my guest is Dr. Kelly Brogan. She is a holistic psychiatrist and the author of A Mind of Your Own. We first had the chance to sit down with Kelly last week, where we discussed how depression may be improperly diagnosed and treated. Today, we've dived deeper with Kelly, learning about her holistic approach for healing mental illness. She discusses her recommended elimination diet, detoxification methods, and the benefits of sleep and meditation. She emphasizes how these four pillars of health work together synergistically to allow us to flourish with optimal health. So this is part 2 of a 2-part series on mental health. If you didn't listen to part 1, go back to episode 122 and check it out. If you did listen, stick around and we'll dive into the conversation in just a moment. First, I want to remind you that it is March Madness, not just in terms of basketball, but in terms of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It is our March Membership Madness. You can become a member of the foundation, supporting its important work, including this podcast, by the way, for only $30. That's a $10 savings over regular membership. Join in March by going to westonaprice.org and clicking on the Member Yet button. The Weston A. Price Foundation is committed to helping you and the world eat better. And this episode is brought to you in part by Sauna Space, the sauna for every body. Sauna Space is the maker of incandescent-based, full-spectrum, EMF-shielded, portable sauna solutions. Handcrafted with love in the USA. Go to saunaspace.com and use the coupon code WISETRADITIONS, all caps, one word, for 10% off at checkout. That's Sauna Space, the sauna for everybody, saunaspace.com. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Kelly.
Great to be back.
So we had to do a part 2 because we were just scratching the surface last time about this whole concept that depression could be a symptom and not a disease.
And I have a big mouth and a lot to say. So.
Can you recap, especially for those listeners who maybe didn't even catch last time, just a little bit? What does that mean that it's a symptom and not a disease? What do you mean by that?
I, like so many people, once believed that depression and actually mental illness on the whole was based in the disease model, right? So it's something you probably inherit. We understand biochemically what it's all about, and we've figured out how to help people, and it has to do with pharmaceuticals that manage these imbalances that keep people well. And it wasn't until I began to look at the literature through a new lens, a lens that I acquired because of my own healing experience from an autoimmune condition, that I learned about all of the assumptions and myths and perhaps even some measure of propaganda that I had been marinating in for my entire Ivy League training, And I put down my prescription pad, and it was then that I began to see what it is to really resolve the root cause driver of quote unquote mental illness. But if we say depression, we're really just saying this is like a fever, right? It's a way that the body is expressing that something is out of alignment, and we have to investigate what that is. It could be thyroid imbalance, blood sugar instability. It could be a hormonal issue. It could be a B12 deficiency. And it's important to begin with that investigative mind so that you don't necessarily, go down the rabbit hole of medications for life.
Absolutely. And I think of my daughter right now who had a little rash by her mouth. We could simply put some hydrocortisone cream on it and hope it goes away, or we could try to figure out what caused it in the first place.
So you're not just chasing it. It's like a whack-a-mole game otherwise. It's going to crop up somewhere else if you just try to, suppress it.
So let's talk a little bit about part 2 in your book, and that's what I was looking at earlier as well. When you start to address letting food be our medicine, how can that be? Can you go into that a little bit, Kelly?
when I sort of took this deep dive into what are some common reversible physiologic drivers of mental illness, but specifically depression, I began to learn a lot about the gut microbiome. We have this understanding now that the gut and the brain are connected in this bi-directional way, so that what goes on an immune and neurochemical level in the brain directly impacts the gut, which is not really surprising to most people, right? Because we've all felt a little bit of nervousness before giving a toast at a wedding or giving a big presentation, and we get that sensation in our stomach, or maybe we can get diarrhea, or maybe even we vomit. That direction is sort of intuitive, almost common sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
The other direction, however, is what actually at this point, about 25 years of primary medical literature and scientific literature has been demonstrating, which is that the gut microbiome has a direct impact on brain functioning, not only through the metabolites of bacteria in our gut, so the stuff that they make, like short chain fatty acids, like butyrate, for example, that traffic to the brain and generate signaling messages there, but also, inflammatory messengers that are active on the gut level that are kicked off by imbalances in our gut ecology. And even a relationship that we don't totally understand, which is on the stress response level. So the role of stress hormones like cortisol in mitigating the relationship between the gut and the brain, perhaps even at the immune system level. When I was in medical school, we didn't even know that the brain had an immune system. We literally didn't know that the brain had lymphatic vessels when I was in medical school, which wasn't that long ago, but was long enough ago to recognize that we are just looking through the keyhole. So then it begs the question, okay, so how do we shift and optimize, rebalance this ecology within us, which is bacteria and the virome? So it's viruses, it's archaea, it's fungus. How do we set the conditions so that the gut can heal itself? Well, it turns out the most powerful vector of change, even within 72 hours, according to the literature, is diet, right? That's not so shocking, because what greater connection to our environment do we have to read our environment? It's nutrition. It's the food that we take in, and it's the information that it transmits. So we used to think food was calories, and then we thought it was fat and carbs and proteins. And now, through the blossoming field of nutrigenomics, we understand that food is literally information. And we have this growing understanding that food even contains these little packets that are called exosomes that are literally epigenetic modulators in ways that, of course, we're just beginning to learn about, but it's just extraordinary. It's so much more elegant than we ever thought possible. And so this is where food becomes this self-healing portal. It becomes a way to free your body to heal itself, really.
And this is part of the philosophy of this whole Weston A. Price Foundation Wise Traditions movement.
Preaching to the choir.
Exactly, because we're like, yes, the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine. It's like he knew something we don't, and we're trying to rediscover.
Absolutely. And it's why I love having conversations with people in this community, because you get it, it's intuitive, and it just is a lost thread of our ancestry, which is the deep respect and a shared understanding that food is a sacred relationship to the environment.
Coming up, we go from the theoretical to the practical as Dr. Kelly Brogan gives us some actionable steps to move toward that optimal physical and mental health that we all seek. And we pause now to recognize our sponsors. This episode of the Wise Traditions podcast is brought to you in part by Sauna Space, the sauna for every body. Sauna Space crafts modern product solutions that bring ancestral light therapy and heat therapy to everybody with accessible and flexible design. Experience the rejuvenating power of ancestral healing in the convenience of your own home with Sauna Space. They harness the unique combination of natural near-infrared light and heat therapy, delivering full-body healing and detoxification. I've just started using my single-panel light every evening, and I can already feel the difference it's making in my sleep and my well-being. It is regenerating my cells on a deep level. And all Sauna Space products exhibit beautiful craftsmanship and are backed by a lifetime warranty. So go to saunaspace.com, use the coupon code WISE Traditions at checkout, that's all caps, one word, WISE Traditions, for 10% off. You can also just visit their website for more on the healing science of incandescence. That's saunaspace.com. And keep in mind, everybody, that it is still March membership madness at the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can join the foundation for only $30 during this month. And when you become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation, you become a part of a community of like-minded people with access to an extensive, comprehensive website, easy access to pasture-raised food through your local chapter. You support the raw milk movement and this weekly podcast. It really is a privilege to support this foundation. But beyond that nice, warm, fuzzy feeling you'll get when you do so, you also receive 4 quarterly journals jam-packed with pictures and valuable health information, the shopping guide, helpful trifold brochures, and access to a members-only Facebook group. So join today for only $30. Go to westonaprice.org and click on the Member Yet button. If you want to give more than $30, by the way, you are welcome to do so. What are some nutritional things we can do? What are some steps we can take to reverse that gut imbalance we may be struggling with?
I am a big proponent of a multi-pronged approach because I don't think that in a vacuum, dietary change is enough. I don't think in a vacuum, meditation is enough. And I don't think in a vacuum, detoxification is enough. I just want to sort of foreground what I'm about to say with the fact that the most robust shifts come when you send your nervous system a signal of safety from many different directions. And the outcome is so amplified, if not perhaps even made possible by the beliefs that underpin your effort. So you can change your diet all day long, but if you're changing your diet to lose weight, or you're changing your diet just because you skeptically think maybe, it'll help you lose a zit or two, before your period or whatever, like that's not what this is about. So it's about sort of reorienting yourself about honoring your body, honoring this organism and its complexity, and again, setting those conditions. So the way that I approach dietary change is very strict adherence for a short period of time. So for 30 days to eliminations of inflammatory foods that are almost completely processed food. And I'll enumerate them in a second. And then, of course, as you well know, the inclusion specifically of nutrient dense foods. An important caveat is that I come under the mentorship of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. I know a lot of your listeners probably are familiar with him and his work. And so my patient population, the people attracted to my program, struggle with symptoms of brain fog and depression and chemical sensitivity and autoimmunity and hypothyroidism. So they are almost exclusively what he referred to as parasympathetic dominance. So that means that this explains why my protocol has been very successful in this population as a red meat inclusive protocol. And I know that's not too surprising for you to hear, but many people are shocked in the outside world to imagine that anyone could heal with red meat in their diet, and entrained by this concept that only plant-based or vegan diets actually are radical enough to heal. And perhaps they have their place, but in my population, it was a very strange and actually challenging lesson for me to accept as a former ethical vegetarian that this could possibly be the case. And Nick helped me to understand why that is. So in the first month, we take out some of the usual suspects. So we're focusing on processed food specifically, but I take out all dairy, and that's not because raw dairy is problematic for everyone. It's just so that we can learn whether the casein peptide is an issue for people who, again, have been labeled with psychiatric illness. And there is a good amount of literature to suggest that these people might be specifically sensitive, particularly to cow-based casein. So we take out dairy, we take out all grains initially, although almost 100% of my patient population reintroduces gluten-free grains later on, but we take them out initially. I'll explain why. We take out processed sugar, so like honey and maple syrup, molasses are fine, but it's just processed sugar that we're taking out. And then we're taking out legumes, including soy and peanuts. We're taking out alcohol, and we're taking out coffee. So what's left is animal products of any variety, but with a focus on red meat, which includes beef, lamb, bison, and actually in this case, pork is actually considered sort of in that category in terms of its effects on the autonomic nervous system. Mm-hmm. So any animal foods, pastured eggs, ideally low mercury fish, so things like sardines, mackerel, for example. And then we're also including any and all vegetables except for white potatoes just for the month. Lots and lots of filtered water, lots of natural salt, lots of fats. So things like ghee, coconut oil, olive oil.
It says in your book that you want to make it so people don't feel like they're on an impossible diet, but changing some of these things does sound challenging, maybe even particularly for some, the starches. Can you talk to us about what effect the starches have on the body, and especially with those who have some kind of gut imbalance?
I learned this through my own personal experimentation and then found there's a lot of consensus in a lot of dietary communities about the role of starches, perhaps particularly for women. Even in the modern hunter gatherer, the Hadza trials assessment of the microbiome, there has been an observation that women eat more tubers, they eat more honey, they have a different relationship to starches and sugars than do the men, and their microbiota reflect that. So what I found was that on several months of a ketogenic diet, so, like a strict no carb diet, so to speak, I felt great for a month. This was early in my Hashimoto's journey. And after about 2 to 3 months, I felt worse than ever. And I said, well, what is that about? And that's when I began to learn about the research on what's called resistant starch, which is a kind of starch that is specifically available to your microbiome. So it's almost considered like a prebiotic. And things like white potatoes and white rice, and then some more esoteric stuff like, plantains, cassava, yucca, etc., are significant sources of resistant starch. Corn is as well. And so we really want to see how ready is your microbiome for this power fuel, so to speak, because there may be a time course that you personally need to follow that will be pretty apparent to you. So we restrict all these things, so the beans, the grains, and the white potatoes, just for a month to sort of clear the slate. And then they are introduced sequentially in a good amount so that you can see, do you have gas, bloating, fatigue? Interestingly, I would say maybe like 15% of my practice, when they reintroduce white rice, they have significant and very obvious fatigue in response. Like you would never notice that if it was just a part of your day-to-day life. It's a subtle but highly impactful effect. But if you're ready for it, then you'll feel great and probably even better with the inclusion of these starches. And in my experience, everyone gets to the point where they can include them, but it requires some personal observation because you're really the only one who knows what you need to eat.
We are big in the Weston Price Foundation about people understanding their own bodies and being in tune with them because everybody's different. And
Yeah.
when Dr. Price traveled around the world, he didn't find one traditional diet. He
That's
found
right.
a variety. So it's really important to eat according to where you live, what's fresh locally, and definitely in tune with what your body is signaling to you. Now, I want to just pivot for a minute, Kelly, because you have other recommendations in your book beyond food. You talk about the power of meditation, sleep, and exercise. Can you touch on that for a moment?
Yes, suggesting that there's an amplification, almost like a synergy between these different pillars. It's because I noted that when I combined all of these different factors at the same time in this intensive commitment of 1 month, that inevitably feels like an uncomfortable level of self care, right? So it's a different life for 1 month. I found that these other elements are really critical. So while I'm passionate about food based healing, and I do think of it as being perhaps the most important cornerstone, I also found that my results were amplified, and also my personal life, in my personal healing journey, I had a massive shift when I introduced daily meditation. It was, in my case, in the form of Kundalini yoga, which is a very old branch of yoga focused on consciousness transformation. But what I found was that far from 20 minutes twice a day, which is often how people think of the requirements for meditation, in my personal life of commitments, and also then in my practice and online program, I found that you can get these results with literally 3 minutes a day. So it could be 3 minutes of something as simple as left nostril breathing, which is what it sounds like. Plug off your right nostril and you breathe in and out of your left nostril for 3 minutes. Or it could be, a more elaborate meditation. There are thousands of them online. You could just put in Google Kundalini yoga meditation and then literally any word, anxiety or heartbreak or intuition or gut or whatever. And so I found that that was another amplifier. And then the detoxification piece, I learned from Nick Gonzalez, and that is the notorious coffee enema. that I learned his particular methodology. It's really most relevant to people who are looking to taper off of medication to prepare for that process and really sort of, no pun intended, like drain the bucket so that they can have the resiliency necessary for that process. And then a simple, surprising trick that I teach a lot of my patients is about the 9 p.m. bedtime. I'm a big zealot for early morning meditation, what's sometimes called pre-dawn meditation.
Mm.
When my patients are in crisis, that's the first thing I ask of them is to shift their meditation to 5:30 a.m. because even from an endocrine standpoint, the setting of the template of stress response at that time of the morning is something that I believe we've evolved to do. And so that requires, if you're going to commit to that, that you get to bed earlier. I often challenge my patients to commit to 1 week of 8:30 or 9 o'clock bedtime, but 9 o'clock at the latest. And of course, in my Manhattan practice, I might as well ask them to charter a private jet to China tomorrow morning
Yes.
because it just seems so anathema to their lifestyle. But it's an experiment. What often people find is that they have this natural fatigue that comes on at about 8:30. If you set the conditions to sleep then, you'll find that late night waking and sleep onset are so naturally facilitated and then your whole rhythm can shift into a more organic process. But an openness to making these changes is the critical piece.
I have to admit that I'm a night owl, so it is really hard to hear this, but I do have a friend who was working to change her habits and to be more in tune with her circadian rhythm. And what she did was she gradually bumped up her bedtime by half an hour. So it wasn't like one night she's going to bed at midnight and the next it was 9. Over time, she gradually moved and changed her rhythm, which is fascinating. And it sounds like you think there are a lot of benefits to that.
It's like the boiling the lobster method. I am much more of like a rip the band-aid off kind of gal. So I like extreme change for extreme yield. So I'm sure that that's like a very reasonable approach. And she probably felt over time like better and better and better. The experiment, while extreme, I think sometimes those extreme shifts send a very strong message of change potential to your psyche. And, it's worth mentioning that almost all of my patients are night owls. That's part of being a parasympathetic dominant, not to diagnose you. It's a natural thing. And that's actually a big part of the sort of rebalancing is acknowledging that that's your nature, but then also just sort of seeing if there is a kind of balance and optimization and alignment that can come from working in a complementary way, with your
Yeah.
tendencies, let's say.
Well, this is great. I have 2 final questions to ask you. One has to do with detoxification. You mentioned the coffee enema, and maybe we'll put a link in our show notes to that so people can learn more about that from Nick Gonzalez. What is one other simple thing we might do to detoxify our bodies?
There are a number of different things, ranging from infrared saunas to different herbs and supplements. One is Epsom salt and baking soda bath. So you can just run a very hot, ideally at least chlorine filtered. You can get these like little filters that hang on your bathtub. They're super inexpensive. Filtered bathtub, and then you can put 1 to 2 cups of Epsom salt and baking soda in. You can do that once a week, or actually as often as feels good. Another is skin brushing, which has not only lymphatic stimulation benefits, and it's very simple. There are instructions all over the internet, but basically you're brushing towards your heart abdomen area in long sweeping motions with a kind of like stiff skin brush. Basically, that's what they're called. It also has cosmetic benefits. So, as an exfoliant, it has that benefit as well.
This has been powerful information. I'm really eager for the listeners to get as much out of it as possible. We're going to put a link in the show notes to your book. And I feel like there are no simple answers with depression and mental illness, but what we can say is this. We need to find ways to support our body so that it can heal itself. And a lot of these recommendations are valuable for even people who aren't experiencing any mental health issues. Don't you think so, Kelly?
Absolutely. I so appreciate that you share this perspective because my mission and my passion as someone who used to believe that life was miserable and you just had to get through it until you died and that actually mental illness was, just bad luck, bad genes. I used to believe all of those things. And it wasn't until I began to see with my own eyes that a very different type of reclamation of vitality is possible that then I began to see it over and over and over again. So for me, it's just critical that people know what's possible, that it is possible to heal in ways that are more radical than anyone would ever tell you is ever something you should expect. That the steps are simple, but they do require commitment. They do require belief, and they do require a readiness. So if that readiness feels like it's bubbling up, then the resources are all here. I have a ton of free information and free workshop, et cetera, to sort of introduce people to that on my site. So I'm excited to bring anyone into the fold who feels turned on by this information.
I want to ask you one last question that I pose to a lot of my guests. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
I would say the one thing would be to expect the unexpected. Because if we can sit in a state of not knowing with any degree of certainty what's coming and feel excited and stimulated by that, then the quantum possibilities like amplify. And I think the most dangerous thing we do is to become certain that things are going to be the way they are now forever. I think that's one of the great psychological drivers of depression and anxiety. So to just sort of expect the unexpected, I think, is a way to free yourself from that kind of confinement.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been a real pleasure, Kelly.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
My guest today was Dr. Kelly Brogan. To connect with Kelly, go to kellybroganmd.com. She is so humble. She does not toot her own horn, so I want to toot it for her. She offers all kinds of resources on that site, including a course called Vital Mind Reset, which you need to check out. If you'd like an overview of today's discussion and links to the resources we mentioned, just go to our website, westinaprice.org, and find the show notes for episode 123. Hey, and if you are enjoying these shows, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a thing. And you can rate and review us there as well. And don't forget, you can also share this episode on social media. And speaking of which, you can follow the foundation at Weston A. Price on Twitter or on Instagram at Weston A. Price. Look for us on Facebook as well, Weston A. Price Foundation. Hey, and next week's episode is going to be awesome. It's a win-win. We'll be coming out with a bonus episode with highlights from the Winter Journal with a specific focus on hormone health. And then we get to hear from Sally Fallon-Morell on principle number 10 of the Wise Traditions diet. That is how all traditional cultures make use of animal bones for gelatin-rich broth and more. This is fascinating and inspiring stuff that can really make a difference in our health. So keep on listening, everybody. Last but not least, I want to thank Podcast Village, Rob Ford, Charlie Burney. They are my friends, editors, and producers of this show. And I also want to thank the interns for the show, Cynthia Castro-Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Elisa Canty, Olga de Villiers, Amy Marvin, and Lily Hanft. And finally, let's stay connected, everybody. I'm at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at holistic_Hilda on Instagram, or you can just visit my website, holistichilda.com. I want to support you on your wellness and podcasting journeys. Thanks, everybody.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westinaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.